doing? I said, I can't help it. I'm looking for where I should dive if a mortar rocket comes in, though I know it's not going to happen. But I did that every day, multiple times for over a year. It's called muscle memory. Thankfully for me, this slowly ebbed away after two or 3 months. But I know others aren't so fortunate, and that's why we're here today. So bottom line, in these trying times, I urge my colleagues to come together and advocate for those fighting to transform trauma into triumph and to reclaim their lives. Thank you, General Bergman, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, General Bacon. And, you know, it's one of the first steps to healing is to be able to share our stories. And when you think about in previous times of conflict in our country, the ability to de-stress was a lot simpler than it is now. But I will deal with that here in a couple of minutes. The topic of post-traumatic growth is an opportune time to discuss the promise of psychedelic-assisted therapies to treat mental health disorders like PTSD. Just a couple of weeks ago, I spoke here on this floor in support of 2 amendments that I had led with my friend, Congressman Lou Correa of California, in support of psychedelic-assisted therapies at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Both amendments were passed unanimously by this chamber. Psychedelic-assisted therapies have the potential to be the first genuine advancement in the treatment of veterans' mental health in decades, a true breakthrough therapy potential. Unfortunately, just recently, the FDA's Drugs Advisory Committee recently voted against recommending approval of MDMA-assisted therapy to treat PTSD. Many of us in Congress, and especially those of us who have served in uniform, were deeply disappointed and frustrated by this, what I believe and we believe is a bit of a short-sighted decision. The advisory panel chose to ignore the voices of veterans whose lives have been forever improved by MDMA-assisted therapy in favor of those who have been on a mission to discredit, and I repeat, discredit promising treatment at all costs. That's shameful. We can accept a no, but it should be for the betterment of the greater good, in this case of helping veterans and those who need different kinds of help. It should not be a short-sighted, potentially uninformed bureaucratic decision. I have had the opportunity to personally meet with many of the researchers involved in this study and the veterans whose lives have been forever changed by these therapies in such a positive way. That experience made the potential of this treatment clear to me, and many of the veterans told me that they would not be alive today were it not for this therapy. I am confident that this will be a speed bump in our overall efforts to truly heal the invisible wounds like post-traumatic stress disorder that millions of Americans face today. With that, I would now like to yield 8 minutes to another fellow leader in uniform and esteemed member from the Iowa delegation, Dr. Miller Meeks.
Thank you so much to my colleague, General Bergman, for yielding me time, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today during Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Awareness Month to honor the millions of Americans, including thousands of veterans who have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. As a 24-year Army veteran and one of 82 military veterans serving in Congress, I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to work on legislation that helps veterans diagnosed with PTSD get the care and support they need. One example is the Veterans Care Act, a bill I introduced that requires the Department of Veterans Affairs to conduct and support research on the effectiveness and safety of certain forms of cannabis and cannabis delivery for veterans diagnosed with PTSD. Also, as the chairwoman of the Health Subcommittee of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, along with General Bergman, I have also been able to host several key hearings, and roundtables where we discussed effective treatments for PTSD, including emerging breakthrough therapies with psychedelic-assisted therapy. I've also passed the VIP Act, or Veterans in Parks Act, which allows lifetime passes to our national parks for veterans, Gold Star family members, and even active duty military, because we know of the meditative qualities and healing qualities that can come about through outdoor activity and work within nature. For far too long, society has focused on the negative impact of trauma and struggles caused by PTSD, especially among our veterans. And it's reached a point where being labeled as someone with PTSD has become debilitating. While it's crucial to recognize these challenges and to get appropriate care, it is equally important to reduce stigma and offer more hope to those diagnosed. If you are someone with PTSD, I want you to know that you are not any less of a person because of your diagnosis. You are not a burden. Being diagnosed with PTSD isn't the end of your story. There is a pathway to extraordinary growth and transformation in your life. As a veteran serving in Congress, I'm dedicated to ensuring that you understand that and receive the treatments you need to continue living your life at the fullest. God bless our veterans, and God bless General Bergman for bringing this to the attention of Congress and America. Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month is a time to heighten awareness about the disease and to show our support for the 1 in 9 people aged 65 and older that have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. My mother was one of those. Over 66,000 Iowans and nearly 7 million Americans are victims of this disease. As a doctor myself, I have advocated for affordable health care and doing everything we can to make medical research possible and to make medical research transferred into action. I'm committed to working on legislation that assures Americans impacted by Alzheimer's disease receive the care they deserve, and I call upon my fellow members of Congress to remember those who have Alzheimer's and their families during this month and join me in the fight to end Alzheimer's. Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor Andrew Dong from West High School in Iowa City, Iowa, for being named a 2024 U.S. Presidential Scholar. Andrew is one of 161 students from across the nation being recognized for their remarkable academic achievements, contributions to their community, and success in the fine arts. In his application, Andrew highlighted the incredible work he has done volunteering with mental health professionals, assisting them in developing guidelines for educators across the state of Iowa. As the youngest person in Iowa to be certified in mental health first aid, Andrew is passionate about ensuring our communities have the tools necessary to face the ongoing mental health crisis head-on. With that, I'd like my colleagues to join me in celebrating Andrew and his amazing achievements and wishing him all the best in his future endeavors. Madam Speaker, I rise today to bring attention to the recent floods impacting Iowa currently. After the recent supercell storms, Iowa suffered widespread damage, debris, and record flooding. Some areas received up to 15 inches of rain, and at least 1,900 properties were impacted, with hundreds destroyed. Over the weekend, at least 250 water rescues were conducted. Rivers all across Iowa will be impacted, with extra water moving downstream and crusting to come. And with the potential for possible more bad weather tomorrow and this weekend, the entire Hawkeye State is keeping a watchful eye. I urge my constituents to prepare in the event of flooding and bad storms as they impact our communities. The entire Iowa delegation is working closely with Governor Reynolds and local officials during this difficult time. Finally, thank you to the first responders working around the clock to help Iowans in need. Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize the Eilers family of Solon, Iowa. Emily and Ted Eilers are parents to Evelyn Eilers, who was born at the University of Iowa in September of 2023. Evelyn was tied as the third smallest baby born in the world. Thanks to world-class care available at the University of Iowa, Evelyn was able to come home as the size of an average full-time newborn. Evelyn's survival and the survival outcomes for other extremely premature infants at the University of Iowa Stead Family Children's Hospital are among the best in the world. This is yet another demonstration of the phenomenal care available to Iowans through the university's hospital. As a former doctor at the University of Iowa, I'm proud to celebrate their incredible work and the recent homecoming of Evelyn Eilers. and more important, support a culture of life. God bless the Eilers family, and as always, go Hawks. Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the 7 athletes from the University of Iowa track and field program on their appearance at the Olympic trials this past weekend. I'd like to give a special congratulations to Kalen Walker, the brother of one of our legislative interns. Kalen Walker is a 3-time All-American record-holding athlete that competed in the 100-meter dash at the semifinal round of the Olympic trials this weekend. Kalen is from rural Iowa and graduated from Eddyburg Blakesboro Fremont High School in 2020. He attended Indian Hills Community College in Ottumwa, Iowa, and then transferred to the University of Iowa as a walk-on. Kalen embodies what it means to be a true, hard-working Iowan. He came to the University of Iowa to fulfill his dream of running as a Hawkeye, and this weekend was a step towards fulfilling his dream of being an Olympian. I'm proud to congratulate him and his teammates on their honor of representing Iowa and American. As always, go Hawks. Thank you so much. With that, I yield.
Thank you. And Madam Speaker, I'm going to make a few closing remarks here and yield the rest of my time. I'm extremely grateful for all of my colleagues who have spoken here today and shared their stories, and also celebrated the people who have gone through tough times, whether it be, if you will, something simple as weather-related, but probably more importantly, the stresses of life-related. We are the greatest nation in the world because we treat people right, and we expect the same in return. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to raise awareness of post-traumatic growth. And I want to repeat that. Post-traumatic growth, a positive way forward, not a negative ending. It is my sincere hope that those of us in Congress and Americans across our country can work to help those who have experienced trauma, that they can find growth, purpose, and connection. And said as a veteran and a Marine, our veterans never quit on us. We'll never quit on them. With that, Madam Speaker, I close.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the topic of the special order. It is an honor to host this special order.
Without objection. Go ahead.
It is an honor to host this special order hour in collaboration with the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the Congressional Equality Caucus. As Congress's first out person of color, it is an honor to lead this time on the floor. And as we near the end of Pride Month, it is important to celebrate the LGBTQ+ community's contribution to our community and fight for equal rights and the work that still has to be done. I'm proud to be joined by several of my colleagues in the House and appreciate their commitment to the LGBTQ+ community. Last year, I was joined by Leader Hakeem Jeffries and the co-chairs of the Congressional Equality Caucus and the LGBTQ+ activists to reintroduce the Equality Act. We stood together in solidarity on the shoulders of many pioneers of the LGBTQ+ movement to demand equal protections for LGBTQ+ people. Former Congressman David Cicilline entrusted me with this landmark piece of legislation that would prohibit discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And I take that responsibility very seriously. The Equality Act was passed twice under the leadership of Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, and today it has the support of every House Democrat. The story of LGBTQ equality is not complete without the passage of this legislation. From the Stonewall riots in 1969 to protest over the policing the over-policing and criminalization of the LGBTQ community, to the lives lost to the AIDS crisis, to the heroes of this moment like Marsha P. Johnson and Harvey Milk. Our community has endured adversity, prejudice, and bigotry. Unfortunately, the ugliness of hatred persists. Discrimination against LGBTQ+ people is still active, and violence against more vulnerable members of our community is increasing. The Equality Act would send a message to all LGBTQ+ Americans that their government wants to ensure their dignified existence while honoring those who came before us. In a political moment where the LGBTQ+ community is used to stoke fear and distrust, the Equality Act stands as a way to unite us under the principles that this country was founded: liberty and justice for all. I'm proud to come to the floor during Pride Month to highlight this legislation and to send a message to not only LGBTQ+ people who are living as their authentic selves and who have enjoyed the celebrations and festivities that this month has to offer, but also to those who, for whatever reason, cannot live or love in the way that is true to themselves out of fear of retaliation. To those individuals, I want to say, you are not alone, that you have allies in places you may not expect. You have allies in the nine out members of the House of Representatives, and you have allies in all of the vice chairs and members of the Congressional Equality Caucus. We cannot wait for the day when LGBTQ+ people don't have to make the impossible choice of choosing safety over living authentically. And while I cannot remedy every situation or make every American understand the fear many LGBTQ+ people live in, I can ensure the federal government does not stand in their way. And that's why we need the Equality Act, for dignity for a group who has historically been suppressed and continues to be the target of attacks. We will not stop until this goal is achieved. We will not go back. We will keep fighting. And now, I'd like to yield to my very good friend from Illinois, a deputy whip for the Progressive Caucus and Equality Caucus member as well, Representative Chuy Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Takano and Madam Speaker. Today, I rise in celebration of Pride Month, the LGBT+ community, and to raise awareness on National HIV Testing Day. Queer, Latino, and Black communities have been disproportionately impacted by the HIV/AIDS epidemic and continue to make up the majority of newly diagnosed people compared to their white counterparts. For many, this disparity is compounded by obstacles like poor transportation access, language barriers, and racial discrimination in healthcare, lack of family support, and the fears of deportation. If they seek treatment, to name a few. Make no mistake, comprehensive and inclusive care is a matter of life and death for our communities. While we celebrate the resilience and the beauty of the LGBTQ+ community, I'm proud to join my Democratic colleagues in opposition to Republican attempts to gut funding for life-saving HIV/AIDS programs, and in solidarity with organizers fighting for a pro-equality agenda across America. Thank you, and I yield back.
Reclaiming my time. At this time, Madam Speaker, I yield to my friend from Michigan, the Vice Chair for Member Services for the Progressive Caucus, and also Equality Caucus member, Representative Rashida Tlaib.
There is a mental health crisis among our LGBTQ+ youth in our country, and far too many of our young people are struggling right now to access the care they need and deserve. We know that very much right-wing politicians, including many in this chamber, continue to carry out relentless attacks, just unbelievable attacks on our LGBTQ plus people and push for discriminatory policies. This constant fear-mongering, rejection, and discrimination have real human consequences. According to the Trevor Project, nearly half of our LGBTQ plus youth have seriously considered suicide in the past year alone. And at least one of them has attempted suicide every 45 seconds. This is heartbreaking reality that we are facing. So our words matter. The bills that we introduce matter. These young people, like all people, regardless of how they identify or who they love, deserve the opportunity to grow up and to live with human dignity and equal rights, free from discrimination. Our fight for LGBTQ plus rights is connected to our fight for human dignity for marginalized people everywhere. We must pass the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ plus people from discrimination at work, housing, public accommodations, and guarantee them equal protection under the law. And Madam Speaker, we must also pass legislation that increases access to mental health care, like the Pride in Mental Health Act that funds mental health resources, training for our caregivers, school bullying prevention, and more. To my residents in the 12th District Strong, your Congresswoman sees you, and I love you. And I will continue fighting for the collective liberation of all of our people. Thank you, and I yield.
Thank you, Representative Tlaib. At this time, Madam Speaker, I yield to my good friend from the state of Vermont, Equality Caucus Co-Chair and Progressive Caucus Vice Chair for new members, Representative Becca Balint.
Thank you so much to the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano. And Madam Speaker, I rise today to start with a reflection. When I was in high school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into politics. I was good in front of a room. I loved talking about policy. I wanted to make a real difference in the lives of Americans. So clear. I knew my path. But I also thought that was just a pipe dream because, first of all, I knew nobody in my family who had ever run for office. I didn't know the first thing about doing that. But I also knew at that time in high school that I had no role models for how to serve as an openly gay leader, politician. So I put that away and actually didn't run for office until I was in my 40s because I didn't see a way forward on that because there was just so much homophobia, so much vitriol from within my community, sometimes within my own family. And so I just want to reflect on the fact it's incredible that I'm standing here today in this chamber, the House of Representatives, as the first woman ever to represent Vermont in Congress, as the first openly LGBTQ person to represent my state in Congress. I never imagined that I would be here. And I take it very seriously that I am a leader for all Vermonters, regardless of how they identify. Pride, which is what this month is about, Pride is about celebrating love. It's about celebrating families of all kinds, including my own. I have a wife and 2 teenagers. It's about celebrating the joy that comes from living your authentic self and making genuine connection with other people. But Pride is also a reminder that we must remember the history that brought us here today, of the political struggle that secured so many of our rights, and also the path we still must walk in order to get to true equality. Earlier today, I spoke in the Oversight Committee, waved onto that committee to talk about some of the really horrible rhetoric that has become all too commonplace in our committees and on the floor of the House of Representatives. And I know, because I feel it too, I know so many of us are feeling quite down about the state of the world and discouraged about the battles that we have fought. And we thought we had that discrimination behind us. We thought the hateful and hurtful rhetoric was something in the past. And I get it. We as members of marginalized communities, we understand the despair. We understand why it's so exhausting to think about having to fight these battles over again. But we do not have the luxury of losing hope or giving in to cynicism. As I say often, cynicism is the voice of the status quo. Cynicism tells you nothing can change, so therefore, why even try? I can tell you I've been shocked at the constant attacks on my community that I've experienced in the last year and a half in Congress, and the public debate and the passage of so many dangerous anti-transgender, anti-LGBTQ bills and amendments and riders. And there is this sense that somehow our words don't matter, that they don't have an impact. It's just an amendment. I literally had people say to me in the hallway, you know I don't really believe this stuff. You know I don't really hate gay people. That doesn't matter if what you do in the end is vote for those hateful amendments and riders and bills. Your actions matter. It's not enough to say to me privately, hey, I know you. I know you're a good person. You know I don't mean you. It doesn't matter. If what you do in the end is vote against my rights and my freedoms, and more than that, demonize me within my community, and as the representative from Michigan just said, contribute to the mental health crisis that so many youth in my community suffer from. We can't allow our elected officials and our leaders to continue to demonize and dehumanize other Americans who have the rights that all Americans have to live their lives free from discrimination, to go to work and not have to face discrimination at work, to serve on a jury, to be treated with dignity and respect. That is all we are asking. And we thought that the work was behind us because we are your friends and we are your neighbors and we are your family members. And we have already fought these battles. And the sky didn't fall when we passed civil unions in Vermont, and the sky didn't fall when we passed same-sex marriage, and the sky didn't fall when we passed anti-discrimination legislation. All the terrible things that were going to come to pass by treating people with dignity and respect and love and affording them the same freedoms as everyone else in this country. The sky did not fall. We are still here. We are still a strong democracy. The consistent stream of hate is a reminder that whenever you make progress, and my colleague here knows it so well, whenever you make progress, the backlash comes. And we are in the midst of a furious backlash. And we cannot allow the attacks to go unchallenged. We must go toe-to-toe in committee after committee, in debate after debate on the floor. We cannot normalize the dehumanizing rhetoric, the fear-mongering, the hatred. We must every day call attention to the fact that what is happening in the most powerful body in this country, what is happening is people are using their political platform to demonize and dehumanize and spread hatred and fear of other Americans who are worthy of dignity and respect and freedom. And I hear from so many young people, both in my state and here on the Hill, people who work in this building, people who come to advocate on behalf of organizations and policies they believe in. They say, thank you so much, Congresswoman, for being out about who you are and being open about your family, because it's still really hard to live a life full of joy and promise in many pockets of this country. We risk lives when we don't stand up clearly and loudly against discrimination, against trans people, against queer people, against people who are just different. We have forgotten that everyone in our community, regardless of gender identity, regardless of background, is worthy of dignity and respect and should be afforded the same freedoms and rights as every other American. So we must be loud, and we must not give an inch. And that's why we're here tonight. We're not going back. It doesn't matter how many amendments you bring up, how many riders, how many bills that are attacking our community. We are not going back. We are not going back in the closet. We're not going to stop being who we are. We're not going to stop showing up with courage and dignity and love, not just for ourselves, but for all the young people who are watching us, who see their leaders demonizing them, who tune into C-SPAN and tune into committee hearings, and they say, I can't believe they're spending their time attacking our community again, when all we want is to live a life of dignity and freedom. Why are they spending their time on this? And I have to say, I don't know. I don't know. This month is about loving and living. That's what this is. This is life affirming. Pride is about saying we are here, we are your friends, we're your neighbors, we're your family members, and we deserve dignity and respect. I want to remind my community out there, you be you. Keep being you. Keep being yourself. When we reach our full potential as humans, it does make the world a better place. It makes our communities more rich. I tell you this because I know my 11-year-old self needed to hear that. I needed to hear that from the adults in my life and the leaders. My 11-year-old self was worried that just being me, just having my identity, would limit what I would be able to do in life, which is why I didn't run for office until my 40s. I knew at 17 I wanted to serve my community, but I felt limited because of the homophobia, because of the hatred. I worried that my family would not love me. I worried that I would never be accepted in school because those were the messages. I worried and feared that I would lose friends, and I did. So today, we have to remember where we've come from, and we cannot allow the rhetoric to continue in this body, because it isn't just about the bills that we pass or don't pass. It's about the messages that we are sending to people across this country. Are we a nation that believes that everyone is entitled to dignity and respect and humanity? Or are we going to become a nation that continues to scapegoat those in our communities that for some reason we don't understand. So I'm here as a member of Congress. I'm here as a parent. I'm here as a former teacher. It is the honor of my life to serve my state in the U.S. House of Representatives. I could not be more proud. And I'm going to use my voice to stand up for any community that is in danger of having its rights taken away from it. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from Vermont, and I thank her for her most powerful and righteous voice. I now would like to yield to my good friend from Georgia, a member of the Equality Caucus and a strong advocate for LGBTQ plus equality, a member of the Judiciary Committee, Representative Hank Johnston.
Thank you, Representative Takano, for all that you do in upholding human rights, civil rights for everyone in this country, regardless of what your sexual inclination might be. When you really stop and think about it, I mean, we should be beyond judging each other based on who we love. And that's why I'm so happy to say Happy Pride Month to all people out there, because none of us are free if any of us are not free. And it heartens me, Representative Takano, this day and time, 2024, when we see polling that shows that about 8% of adults in this country identify as LGBTQ. And the reason why it's not more is because we've been conditioned and we're afraid, people are afraid to say who they are, because the older that you get, the more you have to lose by revealing who you are. But I'll tell you, it's also heartening that in 2024, in the millennials, among the millennial generation, 30% of our millennials identify as LGBTQ. What that tells you is that, first of all, the older folks have made it such that the young people feel more comfortable in identifying as who they are. They're not steeped in how much I can lose if I come out. They are young enough to not have anything to lose by coming out. And it's actually so much healthier for them than it has been for the older people who have tried to hide, who have felt the need to hide who they are, and go through life unhappy, go through life miserable. You know, people should not have to live like that. We should be free. People should be free to be who they are. And so that's what Pride Month is all about, is people being able to come out and say that this is who I am, and I love me for being me. And I love you for being you, even though you may have a different sexual inclination than I have. When we allow license to hatred in our lives, you know, first it starts with, okay, I don't like the blacks. And then it goes, I don't like the Jews. And then I don't like people who keep their hair cut short because they look like Nazis. And then it becomes, I don't like short people. I don't like people who like dogs. So, you know, the more that you allow hate, that you license hate in your heart, the easier it becomes for you to hate people who are different than you. What gives you the authority to judge someone? What gives you the authority to hate on someone and to act in that way? It's just not human. The more we become human, the more we begin to love people for who they are and to recognize that they, regardless of their differences from me, are equal to me. And so Pride Month is all about people feeling good about themselves. It's all about challenging folks who have hatred in their heart to remove that hatred. And it's all about sending the message that the march for humanity will continue regardless of whether or not you keep hating or not. And so with that, I will just say that I'm happy to stand with my LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters throughout this country and the world. I'm happy to stand with you in this month, which is Pride Month. Happy Pride Month. Thank you. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia for his kind and warm and righteous words. I now would like to yield to my friend from New Jersey, a member of the Equality Caucus and a strong advocate for LGBTQ plus equality, Representative Josh Geiderheimer.
Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, happy Pride to all. I rise tonight in support of LGBTQ plus equality, a domain in which we've made so much progress, and I'm so grateful for that, but we know we have a long way to go. I want to thank Congressman Takano for his phenomenal leadership, his friendship, what he does on the Equality Caucus as co-chair, and what he does in the halls of Congress every day, standing up to hatred, fighting for doing right, and for, of course, coordinating tonight's Pride Month special. Thank you so much. Yesterday was Equality Day, the anniversary of 3 Supreme Court decisions that transformed LGBTQ plus rights here in our great country. Lawrence v. Texas, U.S. v. Windsor, and Obergefell versus Hodges. And just over 2 decades, we made a century's worth of progress. Unbelievable progress in a short period of time, decriminalizing homosexuality and guaranteeing marriage equality nationally. And yet, in the midst of this monumental progress, there are forces here in the halls of Congress and in state legislatures across our country that want to pull us backward and go after Americans for who they love. So far this year, the ACLU is tracking 515 anti-LGBTQ plus bills in our state legislatures, embedding hate and cruelty into the letter of their laws. LGBTQ plus rights are personal for me, as they are for many people in Congress and for Americans across our country. For the sake of our brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, and friends, we can't and we won't let extremists roll back the clock on the great progress we've made. The monumental progress I highlighted just a minute ago originated in the courts. But really, where it came from is the country, at home, in homes, in communities, and people realizing that it is the right thing to do to make sure people can love who they want and live their lives. I'm deeply grateful the courts made the decisions on marriage equality, but we can't rely on the whims of Supreme Court justices. We need to make these victories permanent through Congress. That's why in 2022, I helped pass the bipartisan, bicameral respect for marriage law, which enshrines marriage equality into federal law. We can and must do the same when it comes to discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. I'm incredibly proud to be a member of the Equality Caucus and a co-sponsor of the Equality Act, which will ban this discrimination outright. We've now passed the Equality Act twice through the House. I urge House leadership to bring it up for a vote once again. Equal treatment isn't a partisan issue. We can send a message of acceptance to our country by sending this bill to the president's desk. This is a place where we can work together and come together. Finally, we must stop the mistreatment of our LGBTQ plus community. That's why I'm introducing the Elder Pride Protection Act with Congresswoman Angie Craig of Minnesota, an Equality Caucus co-chair, which will combat the runaway abuse facing LGBTQ plus seniors across our country. It is a real issue, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this critical legislation. Let's never forget the words of the heart of our country, found in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The best way that we can move forward and go and live up to the founder's vision is by standing for LGBT plus equality and happiness. And equality, I mean for everybody here in the greatest country in the world. I know if we do that and stand together and work together, our best days will always be ahead of us. I yield back and want to again thank Mr. Takano.
I thank the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer, for his commitment and the spirit which he brings to fighting for justice for LGBTQ people. Happy Pride to the gentleman. Madam Speaker, I wish to turn my attention toward the world and the international stage. LGBTQ plus issues continue to be the topic of public debate globally. In every corner of the world, there has been movement, both good and bad. And we have seen the struggle in many nations in the fight for equality and dignity. On a very positive note, we see in the nation of Greece the legalization of same-sex marriage, making Greece the first Christian Orthodox country to pass such a measure. Taiwan is making historic strides toward equal rights for the LGBTQ plus community. In 2019, on the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, Taiwan became the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. Then this past year, legislators in Taiwan extended the Same-Sex Marriage Act to grant adoption rights to LGBTQ plus couples. Now both individuals in a same-sex, who are part of a same-sex couple with children are able to be acknowledged as legal guardians and can experience the parental rights enjoyed by all other couples. And this past October, Taiwan celebrated Pride with over 175,000 onlookers from all over the world gathering in Taipei to join the march. This year's theme was Stand with Diversity, which sought to recognize the diversity of every person and respect different gender identities. And in January, Taiwan elected its first openly gay legislator. But the most promising sign of LGBTQ plus equality came earlier this month from Taiwan when legislators approved a marriage equality bill, a move that puts the country on a clear path to becoming the first Southeast Asia, the first nation in Southeast Asia to recognize same-sex couples. Excuse me, Madam Speaker, I think I meant to say the nation of Thailand, right? It's they have Taiwan in my remarks, but it was Thailand. All of this is happening in the shadow of a more and more repressive People's Republic of China. The state authorities have continually targeted LGBTQ plus individuals and cracked down on pro-equality organizers. These groups lack legal support and are at the whims of an authoritarian regime that seeks to diminish and eliminate LGBTQ plus people. No person should live in fear because of their gender identity or who they love. And it's imperative that we protect the rights for LGBTQ plus people globally and hold governments with this anti-equality agenda. I want to commend Taiwan for their championing of equality for their LGBTQ plus citizens, and it sets an example for other countries in Asia and across the world that have yet to support freedom and equality for our community. And I might just take a note and make an aside here that while I share my Republican colleagues' concern about the authoritarianism of Xi Jinping and the CCP, I have yet to see my Republican colleagues rise in indignation about the way in which the regime of China treats its LGBTQ plus citizens. Recent events in Uganda have cast a harsh light on the global struggle for LGBTQ plus rights, and it's our moral duty to speak out against the draconian laws that criminalize same-sex relationships in that country. More than a year ago, Uganda enacted one of the world's harshest anti-LGBTQ laws, criminalizing same-sex conduct with punishments that include life imprisonment and even the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality, whatever that might mean. Sadly, the law was recently upheld by the nation's highest court. This law is not just a legal measure, it is an instrument of hate and repression, designed to persecute and dehumanize a segment of society simply for being who they are. As someone who has experienced both the triumphs and challenges of being openly gay in public life, I can tell you that laws like these do more than legislate against behavior. They legitimize prejudice, foster environments of fear, and justify violence. They rip apart families, drive people into hiding, and erode the fundamental principles of equality and human rights. We simply cannot and must not look away. Silence in the face of such opposition is complicity. We must use our voices, our platforms, and our influence to condemn these injustices and support those who are fighting for their right to love and live openly and freely in Uganda and around the world. That's why I introduced a resolution condemning this recent regression of LGBTQ+ rights in Uganda. I look forward to my colleagues' support in this measure and to send a message to the LGBTQ+ community in Uganda that they are seen, that they are heard, and that they are not alone. And Madam Speaker, I want to also extend my comments to praise the Biden administration, which has sent a clear message to LGBTQ+ Americans that they deserve to live safely and with dignity. Buried in the 2022 Dobbs decision that stripped women of their reproductive rights was an ominous and dangerous warning from the justices that marriage equality may be next. Congress and the President were quick to act to protect equality by passing and signing the Respect for Marriage Act. Just imagine if we had a commander-in-chief who did not prioritize this sacred right. We know that 169 of my House Republican colleagues voted against it, and their agenda has not changed. But thanks to President Biden, marriage for everyone is safe from an extremist conservative court that has repeatedly shown that decades of old precedents can be overturned with a stroke of a pen in pursuit of their ideological aims. House Democrats, progressives, and President Biden will always protect the right for anyone to marry who they love. The President has also leveraged executive agencies to ensure that LGBTQ+ people are safe and healthy. President Biden has directed the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice to ensure that communities have the tools to curb violence against LGBTQ+ people. The President's goal of ending gun violence is something that will help all Americans, including to ensure that the safety of LGBTQ+ people, as they continue to be targeted based on who they love, what businesses they go to, or how they present. We all remember the tragedies and lives lost from bigotry and fueled by gun violence at Club Q in Colorado and Pulse nightclub in Orlando. Through Congress passing the Safer Communities Act and President Biden's establishment of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, Democrats are ensuring that our community is safe to live our lives authentically and with dignity. A part of living a dignified life is one where you don't have to worry about a doctor turning you away based on your identity. The Biden administration advanced civil rights protections for patients by barring health providers and insurers receiving federal funding from discriminating against those seeking care on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. Reversing this Trump-era license to discriminate comes as LGBTQ+ people face unprecedented attacks on their right to health care. We have seen over 20 states across the country attempt to get in the middle of health care decisions concerning LGBTQ+ care, causing patients to move to states that do not have these hateful regulations or forego care altogether. The action from President Biden sends a clear message. No one should be denied care or coverage of care due to who they are or who they love. Even this week, the President continues to reconcile the harm caused to LGBTQ+ people in the military. He announced pardons for thousands of former service members convicted of a crime under military law based on their sexual orientation. The effects of these convictions have blocked those who served our country their benefits that they have rightfully earned. This is a meaningful step forward for us to coming to terms with the institutionalized discrimination, targeting, and repression of LGBTQ+ people in the uniformed services. This is a glimmer of hope in a political era when some of my Republican colleagues and many state governments across the country have put some of the most vulnerable among us in the LGBTQ+ community in their crosshairs. Attack on trans youth, particularly those who want to participate in sports, are the new bogeyman of the far right. No student, athlete, or young person should be the target of attacks from members of Congress because they are living as their authentic self. President Biden has responded to these attacks by strengthening Title IX protections. This update to Title IX stipulates protections from sex-based discrimination, which includes gender identity, for the very first time. All of these actions recognize the dignity of LGBTQ+ people and the community, a group that has experienced relentless attacks from my Republican colleagues in Congress. We did not ask to be targets of the far right. We did not ask for our personal lives to be the topic of national debates. What we do ask for is respect and the privilege to live as we are, without fear, something that non-LGBTQ people have never had to consider. I am proud to come to the floor today to highlight the things this administration has done. But our fight is not over until no one is targeted or retaliated against for being who they are. And that's why the Equality Act needs to be taken up, passed, and signed by President Biden to take an even larger step into the future of true equality for everyone, regardless of the zip code in which they live. So, Madam Speaker, in the summer of 1974, I was glued to the television set in my grandfather's living room. My grandfather at the time lived across the street from where I lived. He was an immigrant grandfather, as we say, as in the Japanese language, it's known as, his generation is known as the Issei, or first generation. I was watching on the public television station Representative Barbara Jordan give her remarks during the House Judiciary Committee's hearing on the Nixon impeachment. I believe I was 13 years old at the time. Her eloquent and impassioned speech on the solemn nature of impeachment and the role of Congress in those proceedings made a deep impact on me, as it did for many others. She, in fact, became a national figure because of her role in giving her opening speech. And she said in her very memorable speech, quote, that her faith in the Constitution is whole, it is complete, and it is total, end quote. Her conviction was present to all, and it made an indelible mark on me. It inspired me to pursue public service, and it inspired me to study the art of wordsmithing and rhetoric with the hopes of one day having the same command of language that she did. That journey led me to pursue a career in education. I returned home to Riverside, California, and began teaching in the nearby community of Rialto in the Rialto Unified School District in 1988. Ask any teacher and they will say it is their students, the young, the curious minds that inspire them to strive for greatness in and out of the classroom. This is the same in my story when my students approached me to start the very first gay-straight alliance at that school. Their bravery and clarity of purpose inspired me to run for Congress for the third time in 2012. I had run for the first time in 1992 and again in 1994. And in fact, in 1994, I'd been outed by my opponent. And when my students came to me in 2009, several months after the passage of Proposition 8, and I might say that Proposition 8 was the statewide initiative that overturned the ballot initiative, overturned the California Supreme Court decision that granted same-sex couples the right to marry. The people of California did this in the 2008 election at the same time that they gave President Barack Obama nearly a 20-point margin of victory. A much narrower victory was given to Proposition 8, which overturned marriage equality in California. My students were in a slingshot moment. They surprised me. They came to me and said, "Mr. Takano, many kids at our school are upset about the injustice of Proposition 8, and they're mad, and they want to start a gay-straight alliance." What was amazing to me was that over 100 kids turned up in my classroom for that first organizing meeting. And it began to make me think that, that another run for Congress was something that I should start thinking about. That my experience in 1992 and 1994, 1992 almost winning against my opponent, and 1994 being a year in which I was attacked for being gay and homophobic attacks were used. I found that in 2012, I was surrounded by family, loved ones, and supporters as I was elected to Congress, making me the first out person of color to be elected to the House of Representatives. My story is not all that unique. There are still LGBTQ plus people whose queerness is used against them, whether it is being outed or otherwise forced to stay in the closet for longer. Pride Month and the idea of pride reminds us that it isn't always the case that an out gay Asian man could come to the floor of the House of Representatives and stand alongside his colleagues to celebrate his identity. It wasn't always the case that bills like the Equality Act could be introduced and nevertheless passed out of committee and out of a chamber of Congress, let alone twice. We have made so much progress, but there is still so much more to do. There are still members of our community being targeted, harassed, and diminished by those with hatred in their hearts. So while the journey to full equality for the LGBTQ plus community is long and winding, and I stand here on the floor of the House of Representatives with clear eyes, proud of the progress we have seen in the past decade and beyond, along with a faith in the Constitution that is whole, that is complete, and that is total. Madam Speaker, just a few miles from here is the Congressional Cemetery. There is a silent protest happening. There amongst the tombstones of former representatives, senators, and former cabinet members is the tombstone without a name, and instead bears the message, quote, "When I was in the military, they gave me a medal for killing 2 men and discharge for loving 1, end quote. Leonard Matlovich is laid to rest there, a Vietnam veteran who rose to fame in 1975 by becoming the first gay service member to publicly reveal his sexuality, challenging the military's long-standing ban on LGBTQ plus people. And after meeting with famed gay rights activist Frank Kameny in D.C., Matlovich hand-delivered a letter to his commanding officer declaring his sexual identity. Despite years of exemplary service and multiple tours of duty in Vietnam, which included a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart that he had earned after nearly being killed by a landmine, he was discharged. 13 years later, Leonard passed away from HIV/AIDS after years of advocacy, bravery, and being a voice for LGBTQ plus service members serving during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Our nation failed Leonard, and the estimated 114,000 service members who were discharged on the basis of their sexual orientation between World War II and 2011. The repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell came 13 years ago, but the hurt, shame, and legacy of this rule lives on in the form of missed benefits and harassment. As ranking member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, I've heard stories from former service members who either ended their service early or were discharged due to who they loved. To date, there has been no congressional-led effort to investigate the historic and ongoing impacts of discriminatory military policies on LGBTQ+ service members and veterans. That's why I've introduced legislation to establish a commission to collect facts and testimonies, while also providing recommendations to Congress, VA, and the Uniformed Services on how to move forward from these harmful policies. There are currently 250,000 active duty LGBTQ+ service members and over 1.5 million LGBTQ+ veterans receiving health care from VA. But there continues to be a pervasive lack of data collection on LGBTQ service members and veteran populations, and an absence of education on the LGBTQ+ community who serve in uniform. I stand ready to pass this legislation so that even more veterans can experience the world-class care that all veterans are entitled to through the VA. I just want to say in closing that Pride Month is a time for celebration, but is also time for action. I want to thank all the speakers who joined in this special order hour, and to pay tribute to the LGBTQ+ community, and to enunciate the work that is left to do. Our speakers today have made clear the progress that we have made, but also the work that we still need to do in order to achieve full equality. This month, and every month, the Congressional LGBTQ+ Equality Caucus stands in solidarity with LGBTQ+ people throughout the country and around the world. We will never stop fighting for your rights. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of July 9, 2023, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, for 30 minutes.
Thank the Speaker. As we will be recessing tomorrow for the week, next week many of us will be celebrating America's Independence Day back home in our districts and throughout the country. Very few of us will be here, a few may, but we're rarely, if ever, on the floor of the U.S. House on Independence Day. It is obviously a day not just worth celebrating, but that the founders intended specifically for us to celebrate. I recall now 4 years ago, in the summer of 2020, in the midst of some of the protests and riots and burning of buildings, tossing of statues and damaging of statues throughout the country in the summer of 2020, there was a lot of efforts to tear down monuments and memorials. And I took my staff and I drove to Philadelphia on July 2nd. We were here late, right up through that day. I think we'd finished voting on the 1st. So on July 2nd, I went up and I drove with my staff and went to Philadelphia, and I went to Independence Hall and visited with the National Park Service there, who were caring for Independence Hall. Fortunately, there was nobody at that point threatening to damage Independence Hall. There were some rumors and concerns. And I recorded a video there and talked about the importance of Independence Hall. And in that speech, or in that video, when I recorded that, I pointed out that it wasn't the bricks and the mortar, it wasn't the building itself, it wasn't the structure. That's all interesting to go see from an historic standpoint. But it was what those men did inside of Independence Hall that changed the course of history forever. And the National Park Service was very gracious. They allowed me and my staff, 3 staff members with me, to go into Independence Hall on July 2nd. And we were alone. It was just us because it was closed down for public tours because you'll remember this was during the time of COVID. And we were able to be in Independence Hall on July 2nd. Now, why is that interesting? Well, because the students of history will know that that was the actual monumental day. That was the day that our leaders of this, then the colonies, but the founders of this country, the leaders, broke away from the crown. That was the day that they voted. On July 3rd, the next day, John Adams wrote a letter to his wife, Abigail, back home in Massachusetts, in which he wrote the following. Remember, of course, he couldn't call her, he couldn't text her, he couldn't send her an email. So he wrote Abigail a letter that would get to her, saying, quote, "Yesterday the greatest question was decided, which ever was debated in America, and a greater perhaps never was nor will be decided among men. A resolution was passed without one dissenting colony, that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, and as such they have, and of right ought to have, full power to make war, conclude peace, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which other states may rightfully do." The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations, from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore. You will think me transported with enthusiasm, but I am not. I am well aware of the toil and the blood and the treasure that it will cost us to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet through all the gloom, I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory. I can see that the end is more than worth all the means, and that posterity will triumph in that day's transaction, even although we should rue it, which I trust in God we shall not. Now again, that was July 3rd, 1776, the day after those men voted in Independence Hall to separate from the crown. Now they had not yet adopted the Declaration of Independence. That would occur the following day, on July 4th, 1776. Now, obviously, Mr. Adams thought July 2nd would be the day that would be celebrated. Of course, as it turns out, because the Declaration was signed and dated July 4th, that became the day in which we celebrate our independence and all that flows from it. It might seem trivial, and in some respects it is, right? So long as we're celebrating. But in the midst of the parades and the fireworks and the hot dogs and the fun of next week, we should remember why. We should remember what Mr. Adams wrote to Abigail. We should remember what they sacrificed. Much is made in this town often of the palace intrigue of what one member says to another or who's endorsed by another. Much is made of relationships and who has angst with whom. Shall we not remember that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were literally at each other's throats, fighting because they disagreed so vehemently about the power of government, federal versus state? Shall we not forget the duel between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton? Shall we not forget the massive disputes our country has wrestled with? And I'll just say this, gladly. It is one of the great things about this country that we with passion shall engage on behalf of the people that we represent to come here and fight for them, to stand up and do something that we said we would do when we came to this town to change the trajectory, to preserve the republic that these gentlemen met and pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to defend. And they meant that, and they knew what it meant. And I think it merits a debate here among our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, in both chambers, in the executive branch, in the judiciary. What is it that we are doing? What are we doing on behalf of the people who sent us to this town? What animates us? Is it to get reelected? Is it to raise money? Is it to chair a committee? Is it to have a certain amount of power? Or is it to fundamentally preserve and protect this great experiment for our children and our grandchildren? Is it to put all on the line? Many great patriots in this chamber wearing the battle scars of lost eyes and lost legs, both sides of the aisle, for fighting and standing and defend this country and defend the flag that sits behind the speaker's chair. But what are we doing? What are we doing as elected members of Congress? I hear often now from people that I represent, I'm tired of another sternly worded letter. I'm tired of yet another hearing. When they see the country that they love being attacked not necessarily by enemies abroad, but by our own people and in many cases our own leaders. The people whom I represent, who reach out to me, who pull me aside in an airport or pull me aside at home or pull me aside in the supermarket or at school when I drop my kids off. They don't come to me asking about some endorsement or some conversation had among members on the floor. They come to me and they ask, why am I not living free? Like, what's happening? What is wrong with our country? And in this week in which we're going to celebrate freedom and celebrate independence, 248 years removed from what I just described in the letter from Mr. Adams to Mrs. Adams. Are we free? It's a legitimate question. Are we a free people? Some people might superficially just say, well, sure, of course you're free. You can walk out of the chamber, Mr. Roy, and you can walk out and say what you want, do what you want. And superficially speaking, compared to certain other places and times in history or other parts of the world, you could argue that we're free. But are we free? Can we say what we want? Can we speak freely without the power of government being used against us? Can we pray at an abortion clinic without being put in jail for 2 years if you're 75 years old, as the Department of Justice just did? Can you speak your mind and say that you believe in the institution of marriage without being threatened with losing your job or potentially punished with hate speech? Can you? Can you speak freely about a man and a woman, the definition thereof, and that a man not be able to swim against a woman in a meet? Yeah, you kind of can, but can you? Can you send your kids to a school where your kids can pray to the God under which this nation was founded? Can you, in that school, trust that your children are going to be taught the values of Western civilization and the founding principles that gave us this great country that indeed ultimately led to the abolition of slavery and freedom for people around the world? Will you be taught about the bravery and the courage of the men at Lexington and Concord or in Independence Hall or in all of the battlefields during the Civil War or in World War I or in World War II and storming the beaches? Will you be taught about that great history? Or will your kids be taught to apologize for being American? Are you free if you're sending your kids to school with tax dollars for your children to be indoctrinated and taught that your nation is not great or that your God does not exist? Are you free? Or are you slave to a tyranny of government that tells you you must pay taxes to something that will say the secular world, itself its own religion, is something you must subsidize and you must bow down to? Are you free if your military is more focused, as many reports have been showing, on advancing non-binary, transgender, lesbian, gay issues than on a military focused on defending the United States of America? Are you free if we're continuing to advance our military into war or fund wars abroad without actual declarations of war, with 20-something-year-old authorizations of the use of military force without ever having a really thorough and full debate on the floor of the House? Are you free if you are continually funding war to the detriment of your own financial well-being and the death and destruction of many of your own colleagues? Are you free if your daughter could be registered to be drafted as the United States Senate just voted to require out of the Senate Armed Services Committee and sent down to the floor, and many Republicans voted for it? Are you free if your daughter can be forced to register for selective service and be drafted? Are you free if you have $35 trillion of debt, you have $1.1 trillion of interest, if you're racking up $1 trillion of debt every 2 to 3 months? Are you free if the US dollar is getting destroyed and you can't afford the groceries and the necessities of life and the car to go take your family to their job or to their school or to carry out your business if you're a plumber or electrician or any other job? Are you free? Are you free if your leaders are spending your nation into oblivion and undermining your economic freedom and well-being? Are you free if your borders are so wide open that your own people are getting killed and murdered by those that are getting left into the streets, out of the jail cells, and the criminals from other parts of the world? Are you free? Do you think Lake and Riley's parents feel free? Do you think the little 12-year-old girl that was just raped in Iowa by 2 illegal immigrants led into the United States and paroled by this administration, do you think they feel free? Do you think that the parents of the 13-year-old girl that was raped, murdered, do you think that the families of the Maryland women, Rachel Marin, Kayla Hamilton, that these individuals, do you think their families who lost their loved ones, do you think they feel free? Because without security, how are you free? Do you think all the parents who've lost their loved ones to fentanyl poisoning with fentanyl pouring into the communities, are they free? Are we truly free? Are you free to comment about presidential elections without being targeted by the Department of Justice? Are you free to talk about schools without being targeted by the Department of Justice? Are you free to go forward and protest in favor of life without being targeted by the Department of Justice, as Mark Houck had happened to him? Are you free to speak freely about the abuses of transgender surgeries in a hospital in Texas Children's Hospital, and not have the Department of Justice come in and prosecute you, as just happened in Texas? Are you free? Are you free if the Department of Justice wants to make you a criminal because you sell a single gun to another person in Texas? To create a national registry to be able to track those weapons? Are you free? Are you free if you can't go buy the automobile of your choice because a bunch of people in Washington have said, no, we've got to regulate it and make it more expensive, we've got to mandate electric vehicles, and now they're piling up on lots and you can't afford the internal combustion engine that you used to be able to go get? And now you're wondering how you're even going to replace the car you have that you need to get around to do your job and carry out your life. Are you free? I would suggest to you that in supposedly the freest and greatest country in the history of mankind, that we are no longer free. I would suggest to you that as we are heading in to celebrate this week, to celebrate the great birth of liberty that this country provided for the world, that we have been stripped of that liberty and that we have been trading it away. And that we have been trading it away right here from the floor upon which I stand. and that we have done so even this year. These are the questions with which we should wrestle. These are the great debates we should have. I'm exceptionally proud to be an American. I'm exceptionally proud to be in Congress. I believe that this country can and must be free again. But a country that has no borders, a country that is $35 trillion in debt, a country whose government is weaponized against its own people, a country that doesn't even know how to define man and woman or pay honor to the God upon which this nation was founded, is not a free country. If we are going to do anything in this body, as Republicans or Democrats, if we're going to do anything in this election cycle, if we're going to do anything in the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, it should be to restore our fundamental God-given rights and to reduce the size, scope, and power of a government that is operating completely in opposition to those liberties. The people who struggle today in this country struggle primarily because of the government that is operating against them, not because the government is protecting or helping them. The people who struggle in this country today, it is because of a burdensome, large, indebted government that has lost sight of the reason it exists and the fact that it is through the consent of the governed that it has its power. The other thing that happened on July 4th, somewhat miraculously, was that both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams passed away. 50 years to the day of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, a document in which both had significant hands in writing. Jefferson obviously being the primary author. On June 24th, 1826, about 10 days before Jefferson died at his home in Monticello, he wrote the following: "To the mayor of Washington, upon having to decline the invitation to the 50th anniversary celebration due to his health, which obviously failed him 10 days later." He wrote, "May our independence be to the world what I believe it will be, to some part sooner, to others later, but finally to all, the signal of arousing men to burst the chains under which monkish ignorance and superstition had persuaded them to bind themselves, and to assume the blessings and security of self-government. That form which we have substituted restores the free right to the unbounded exercise of reason and freedom of opinion. All eyes are opened or opening to the rights of man. The general spread of the light of science is already laid upon to every view. The palpable truth that the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God. These are grounds of hope for others. For ourselves, let the annual return of this day forever refresh our recollections of these rights and an undiminished devotion to them." I hope that as we go out as representatives of the people in this great republic over the next week and go home to our districts, I hope we will remember those words. But that ultimately doesn't mean much. I hope that when we come back to this chamber, we will remember those words. I hope that as we form our plans for the coming years, that we will embrace with the seriousness and resolve of all those we celebrate and to whom we give lip service, of our great admiration for their sacrifice and their courage, whether they wore the uniform and stormed the beaches at Normandy or they fought for our freedoms at our founding, or whether there were these men in that room, or whether there are those who came before us representing the people in this chamber, it has to be more than just simple words of recognition. It can't be a fancy celebration at an 80th anniversary of D-Day. We have to actually carry out those words of affection by being willing to sacrifice our own well-being and good for the next generation. Because that is what we have lost. We have lost the willingness to sacrifice it all so that the next generation might live free. To give up the comforts of promises from a federal government, of continued checks, continued welfare, to give up the trappings of, frankly, a heavily falsified world of comfort in suburban America, propped up by profligate government spending, waiting to teeter off the edge. This is not about personalities in this chamber. This is not about someone being too caustic or mean to one of their colleagues. Grow up. Wake up. Understand your duty. Understand that when you come here and you swear an oath and you sit before that flag and you sit in this chamber and all the speeches that come before it, that we owe it to all of those 400,000 at Arlington National Cemetery and the thousands of cemeteries across this country in which those who gave or were willing to give the last full measure of devotion, we owe it to them and those who risked it all, to risk it all ourselves. What good is an election certificate that we are unwilling to use in fullness? This next week, I will look forward to riding in a parade in Central Texas and celebrating with my 14-year-old and 13-year-old, my wife and my friends and family, just like everybody else. And I'll have a good time doing it. But when we come back here on July 8th, let us set out to do the hard work that is actually required. Not the pointing of fingers, not the recriminations, but actually set out to do the things we said we would do to cut the profligate spending, secure the border of the United States, make our military the strongest military it can be, sparingly used, giving them the care when they get home, the tools to carry out their jobs, healthcare freedom, going to the doctor of your choice, energy freedom, being able to get reliable energy in the cars of your choice without dictates from these bureaucrats in this town that are crushing the American dream. America's going to turn 250 years old in 2 years. Are we going to give as the birthday present for America turning 250 years? Are we going to give our kids and our grandkids their birthright, or are we going to take it away from them? I hope it is the former. And with that, I yield back.
Does the gentleman have a motion?
Move to adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.